Section 3 of TA 23-06 because it does not convey an accurate interpretation of state statute building permit requirements and exceptions. For example, the Huntersville zoning ordinance requires a building permit to install or repair a water heater, while the state statute, General Statute 160D 1110 referenced above, does not require a building permit to install or repair a water heater in one or two family dwellings as long as specific criteria outlined in the statute are met. In addition, there may be other exceptions that are allowed in the North Carolina General Statute 160D-1110, Section 1M, that impact the town zoning ordinance that should also be identified and addressed.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. I'm sure we've got some discussion, so go for it.
Well, I made the motion, but I made my comments prior. I think I'm good unless some question comes up that I feel like I need to answer or comment. Thank you.
Frank, do you have the particular section of the North Carolina Code that deals with the water heater issue?
I was just about to ask.
That's on page 18 of House Bill 4888. I think I sent each one of you a copy of that. If you look at that, that's House Bill 488, rewrote, changes, but this wasn't changed. This was always been this way, or at least it was in the previous edition. The only thing that changed were some minor things about adding the word North Carolina here and there in code and taking out one or two comments. But like I previously said, this is like a building inspector coming into your home. The Ordinance Advisory Board and now the Planning Board sees that our zoning ordinance is not complying or doesn't comply with or properly reflect the intent of the general statute.
Okay. Ken, you want me to read this section? So we can get down to the nuts and bolts of it? I might see the difference. It says, the installation, extension, or general repair of any plumbing system except connection of a water heater that is being replaced if the work is performed by a person licensed under GS 87-21 who personally examines the work at completion and ensures that a leak test has been performed on the gas piping and the energy use rate or thermal input is not greater than that of the water heater that is being replaced. There is no change in the fuel or energy source or location, the capacity, the routing, the sizing, or the venting, or the piping, and the replacement is installed in accordance with the current edition of the North Carolina Building Code. So this gets into a lot more detail about the water heater, and if it's looks like if it's a straight replacement using all the plumbing and piping, all you really have to do is get a licensed person to come in and examine the work of would-be homeowner. Is that what I'm reading from that? Your interpretation, Frank?
My interpretation is that you are allowed to do that as long as you have a certified individual who follows this criteria.
Right.
I didn't feel like it was necessary. I don't feel like it's necessary to put that criteria in our zoning ordinance, but it should be reflected and referred to in some way that a homeowner knows that they do not have to get a building permit to install or repair a home water heater.
So were we to take that paragraph and lift and shift it into our ordinances under the section that only briefly references hot water heater in, I think it's item G under section 3.1 building permit?
And I didn't want to do that.
job.
I could have set, I understand, I could have set and rewrote this the way I thought it should be, but I just want to point out that it needs to be reflected in some way, and I leave it, just like at last time at the HOAB meeting when I made the motion, that the intent of all my statement is for the planning department and legal to look at the interpretation and add those exceptions that as they apply to our zoning ordinance. Not all these exceptions, there's further exceptions the further you read for other items. And they may not be reflected in our zoning ordinance and therefore do not have to be added into the zoning ordinance as written.
Okay, thank you. You care to comment on that?
listing every single exception for every single item in there. That would kind of bloat the ordinance.
Well, I will also point out, go back and look at sections 1 and 2. Okay, section 2, notwithstanding, right, either one, notwithstanding the foregoing, nothing in this subsection shall be interpreted to conflict with North Carolina General Statute 160D 804. Go to section 1. Nothing in this subsection shall be interpreted to conflict with the building design elements provisions as found in North Carolina General Statute 160D 702B for structures subject to North Carolina Residential Code. You go to section 3. There is no such reference.
Correct. Would you like us to add that?
Well, that's what I'm at. Maybe that needs to be changed in some way. I'm looking for,
like to amend
I'm
your
looking for a
motion to
way
this?
to protect the resident and properly reflect the intent of the state statute.
And if you would like to amend your motion, we'd be more than happy to take that into consideration for sure.
No. My motion stands the way it is.
More discussion. Chris, you asked about the water heater. Did that, we read through that, and you know where it's at least coming from? Yes. Factually? Okay. Greg, go ahead.
I think I know the answer before I ask it, but it does say a building permit is generally required for a water heater. Doesn't say a building permit is required. Did that change your opinion? Generally, to
Look
me.
at item,
No, I'm asking specific to the.
no, I'm looking specific to this section. Look at subparagraph 7. The following work, even if not in excess of $40,000, installation or replacement of installation, wood stove, or hot water heater.
Is generally required. I think the generally gives some
It trickles down through all of them.
leeway as opposed.
It says the activities below, so it directs you all the way through.
Frank, is your concern, again, I'm trying to get my mind around it, is that if average homeowner only refers to our ordinance, that this is going to lead them to believe that they have to get a permit for a hot water heater, and you're saying by state statute, that's not necessarily the case? I'm just trying to sum it up. Is that really, I mean, okay.
Yes, and there may be other exemptions that do not appear that may apply to something that we're referring to. Not all the exemptions, but that because we state it appears you have to do this, and we don't have to do it.
Got a quick question. Very simple question. For staff, I guess for planning and legal, are you all comfortable that section? Yeah, it was unmuted. Anyway, staff and legal, are you all comfortable with section 3 complying with House Bill 488?
We are.
You've reviewed it, and kind of what Greg was saying, I mean, I understand where we're getting wrapped up in this, but it says generally required, and that's where I focus on it. I mean, it's generally required. I mean, it makes sense to me reading that, but I respect, Frank in the details of this as well. I would almost say I wouldn't list anything, but generally required, I mean, kind of, to me, is very sufficient. And if y'all are comfortable, I mean, I feel better about it.
Yeah, we are comfortable with the language as proposed.
Okay, I just wanted to ask again.
Sure.
We're definitely getting in the weeds, but that's okay. That's what we're here for. Building permit is generally required. Frank, would it be better if it said a building permit may or may not be required for the activities? I know where you're going with this. The uninformed homeowner refers to this and feels like they have to run down and get a permit for something they don't have to. That's what we're trying to avoid here, right? Mm-hmm. So does that make it a little bit more clear versus, again, if I'm just reading this generally required, I'm probably more led down to believe that all this is. Whereas if it says may or may not be required, does that bring more attention to average homeowner that maybe I don't have to do this, maybe I need to ask the question?
I'm happy with my motion. I'll let the town board to decide.
Okay, we have a motion. It's been seconded. We've discussed it some. Amendments have been requested and will not be taking place. Does anybody want to make a substitute motion? If not, we will vote on the motion as it stands. Okay. All right.
Is,
Yes, sir.
is there any discussion about my comment about changing a couple words? Does that do anything, or am I just,
I would be happy to hear that.
what's that?
I'd be happy to hear it, and
I'm not trying to take a vote here. I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to get to a resolution. I'm also trying to, because I agree with Frank where he's going with this.
I do
But I
too.
also want to get to a point where, I mean, we've abided by the law here. I'm comfortable with that. But I also want to protect average Joe homeowner. So just, I don't mind making a substitute motion, I think. But
So a substitute would have to be made anyways, right? If the original motion is not approved. Or, okay.
It would not be a substitute. If this motion fails, it would not be a new motion. It would be a separate new motion.
Procedural difference.
Goes away.
I can stumble through this. I'd like to make a motion,
Substitute motion.
a substitute motion. In considering the proposed amendment, make sure I'm on the right, TA 2306, the planning board recommends approval based on consistency with all policies of the Huntersville 2040 Community Plan in compliance with state statutes, with the exception and revision to Section 3(1), replace a building permit is generally required for the activities below with the language, a building permit may or may not be required for the activities below. It is reasonable in the public interest to amend the zoning ordinance because it complies with the Huntersville 2040 Community Plan and state statutes. The end.
I'll second that.
Before that, staff, Jacob, is from a legal perspective, is that reasonable language?
Yes. I think I might just prefer the word may be required, because if you're saying it may not be required, then, I think it's something that we could definitely work with.
Jacob, your concern with that, does that stem from like a legal definition? Does when you see something like may or may not, does that mean something different?
Well, just
to
the
you
word-
and your peers versus us in,
Just the word may accomplishes both already. May means yes or no, so just adding the may not, I think,
That's confusion.
adds unnecessary wordage.
I'm a simple resident, and may not helps me.
Okay.
Scott, if I can. Where,
Yeah, the additional.
before you do that. I'm sorry, I'll just lean forward. Before you do that, you had said here in section 3, building permit may be required for the activities below. Are we omitting this entire bottom sentence? Was that your intention? Because you said may or may not, and then
No, I was simply replacing the second sentence is all I was doing. Everything else remains the same.
So you want to say a building permit may or may not be required for the activities below, third sentence. Other building activities may also require a permit.
Correct. Tracy, did you, thank you.
Okay.
I think,
Or you,
well,
and then back to
you want to
these.
amend it? I'd like to,
You can state it and he can accept.
All right, I'd formally like to ask that you also add to the end of that paragraph the phrase in the above section that says, notwithstanding the foregoing, nothing in this subsection shall be interpreted to conflict with NCGS 60D 804. 160D 804.
I accept it.
I think that's not the correct.
I accepted the amendment.
So to confirm, you're changing section 3 still, right? Okay, that would be 160D 1110.
Specifically add on section 1M, building permit. It's a three-page general statute, building permit. It covers more water heaters.
Yeah, we'll get the correct reference.
And staff will make sure there's a correct reference.
Okay, we have an amended substitute motion. It's been seconded. Any discussion, any further discussion, really, on the substitute motion?
Frank, I appreciate that you truly do look at this in detail, more so than I ever do. And I appreciate it, and I'm hoping that what I've done is still captured what you want to do, but also allows us to move this forward. And I may not have, but that's my only comment.
Hey, Scott, we all know, we come up here and we make our arguments for positions. I don't take it personal. I just felt like this needs to be handled in some way. If this is what the sausage being made, if this is the final product that approves, then I'm good with that, but I ain't voting for it.
And I will take it personally.
Oh, awesome. All I will say about this before we take a vote, that I wasn't 100% in agreement with Frank, not 100% in agreement with you, but I was always picking the one that sends it back, and here's why. A official vote from the Huntersville Ordinance Advisory Board may not be required for it to come up here to us and take action and so forth, but the original vote was they wanted it to go back and then be brought back to them so they can weigh in on it again. The second vote, which was the motion to reconsider, did not happen correctly, and in my mind, does not count. And so I feel, out of respect to them and what they asked for and originally voted on, they deserve to have this back. If it doesn't end up happening, and this is just a speech that I've made, then so be it. But I won't be voting in favor of your amended motion. Any other discussion? No?
Only real quick, that, again, HOB, any of us can still go back and bring Section 3 back up and go through the process, which I know takes some time, but again, if anybody feels that strongly about it, let's do it, and I'd be glad to take it back up, but I also feel comfortable that we're 90% there, let's move this forward, we can go back and clean it up again.
All right, all those in favor of Mr. Hensley's substitute amended motion? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Any opposed? 1, 2, 3, okay. Substitute motion carries 6-3.
Thank you.
Yes. All right, agenda item 4C, we're going to consider a recommendation on petition R 23-10, Commercial Communication Tower, is a request by Berkeley Group 3 LLC to rezone approximately 6 acres located located at 15105 Holbrooks Road from transitional residential and neighborhood residential district to a special purpose conditional district. My goodness, I apologize.
TR to special purpose with conditions for commercial communication tower. The Vermillion subdivision is located to the north of this site, as well as the landfill to the east and south. To the west of this site is vacant land and residential properties. The conditions of the approval will limit the uses allowed on the site to only a commercial communication tower and any related accessory uses. The site will have access via a 15-foot easement through the Greenway Waste landfill site, and the applicant has recently updated their tree save to now include 83% of the specimen trees. That was not in your packet, but that was provided to us by the applicant since then. All conditions of Article 9.9, commercial communication tower requirements will be met, including that the tower will be 200 feet from the nearest residential property line. And this is their updated tree save plan with the increased specimen tree count. The tower will be 195 feet tall and include a 4-foot lightning rod on top. A light will not be located on the tower according to the applicant, and the facility will be surrounded by an 8-foot chain link fence and an opaque vegetated screen. This is a coverage map provided by the applicants. On the left is the current and the proposed with the communication towers on the right. The more green, the better the coverage. The 2040 Community Plan Policy PS1 and LU1 both support the commercial communication tower as it considers the use a utility that serves an essential service to the community for use by both the general population and emergency services. The proposed communication tower location fits in with the Holbrooks Road study area as it would directly border the landfill while also complying with the required 200-foot separation from the adjacent residential property. This would create a natural buffer between the existing landfill and neighboring residential properties. Staff recommends approval because this is considered a public utility that helps communication coverage for both the general population and emergency services. And if you guys have any questions, I can answer those for you.
All right, thank you. Any questions for staff before we check with the applicant? None. Okay. Would the applicant like to present or say anything?
We will be available for questions. We have a quick presentation that we can go through, but I'm Robert Irvin from Irvin Law Group. I'm the zoning attorney. Tonight we have Tim Sutton from AT&T, and we have John Brown, who's the property owner. We're willing to answer any questions you have. Nathan did a great job going through the site plan and everything. But so the reason why this tower needs to go here is because a lot of times there's an issue with coverage or capacity in the area. Here we have an issue with both. There's a coverage issue and a capacity issue. So they take in this scientific-based selection. They look at the topography, the network, how much use this tower is getting, and then they decide where this tower needs to be placed. And as you can see here, the it's become a societal essential service. 97% of adults have a wireless phone, and only less than 27% have landlines. And 80% of E911 calls come in through a mobile device. So that's a very important emergency service. If you can go through here, this wasn't on Nathan's report, but this is the AT&T signal. As you can see in the red dot you got, or in the, never mind, in the red circle, that's where the tower is going to be going. And similar to the other graph, you have the green is good and the blue is bad, and so you can see a huge difference in this. A couple of the frequently asked questions at the community meeting and at the public hearing, we had how far from Holbrooks Road is the tower, and on average it's about 1,000 feet away. And then there was a question about whether or not there'll be a gate at the entrance of Holbrooks Road, and for this site you can see it's kind of a flag lot that goes up to Holbrooks Road. And that road is not going to be a finished road, and there won't be a gate at the end of that, and the access will actually be from the adjacent property, the waste property to the right. And so we have our team members here if you have any other questions about timing or service, so we're here for you.
Thank you, Mr. Irvin. Can I have you just state your address for the record?
Yeah, 19726 Zion Avenue, Cornelius, North Carolina.
Thank you. I do have a question for the applicant. We have, if you go from the proposed site, and humor me if we call it, you go east-northeast from there, approximately 1.25 miles, you hit the western boundary of Bradford Field. That is set up for what I would call like left in, left out. I'm sure there's a different, but pilots have to loop left to make the landing, use the runway, west to east, and when they take off, loop left again. FAA requires a light at 200 feet. I'm sure there's a reason why this is 12 inches less. FAA also says that based on, let me see if I can find it. An FAA aeronautical study may reveal that essentially a light would be necessary even if it was under that 200 feet. The reason I bring this up, of course, is because of the airfield and because this tower is to the west of the airfield and they are looping to the left. Now, I also, for what it's worth, I did check with a pilot friend of mine, and he says that at 1.25 miles out, you really have no business being down at the 200-foot level already on making approach. But my two questions are, was an aeronautical study performed? And B, and excuse the layman's terms in this question, is it really a big deal to just add a light in the airport there?
Well, I can't speak to it, exactly, but I know that it has to be 200 feet to require a light. And a lot of the questions at the neighborhood meeting were around, is there going to be a light? Am I going to have a flashing light in my backyard? And so that's one of the reasons why we don't want to have that light for nuisance light and people coming through people's windows at night. As far as the aeronautical study goes, I know it meets all the FAA requirements. It meets all the governmental requirements for the cell tower, telecommunications tower. So that's all that I can speak to on that. I can get you an answer on whether or not there was an official, my layman's terms too, aeronautical study, aerospace study. Yeah, I can look into that for you.
I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
I understand.
Yep. Thank you.
A follow-up to that. I think Mr. Farber has a phone number I gave him today. I talked to Mr. Bradford, the owner of Bradford Field, about the airfield. And he can speak for himself. I don't know if he came tonight or not. There he is. So if something comes up, I guess you could have let him, he could speak. Jacob, he can't speak? Understand. But I will try to paraphrase our conversation that I had with Mr. Bradford today. He understands that the tower goes there. He's not opposed. He can't stop the tower going in. And he understands. When I said it's 199 feet, he said, well, it's under 200. So he knows what the rules are. And I had asked him the question, well, would a light there be safer for your pilots taking off? And he said, a light would be nice and safer. But I would ask for you guys to reach out to Mr. Bradford and discuss this with him. For those that don't know, checked, that airfield has 65 parking spots, and if I remember correctly, 30 aircraft operate in and out of that on a pretty regular basis. Not a lot of people know that, so keep it secret.
Yeah, I don't know much about it.
So, but I would ask the applicant and for you to reach out with him and just discuss this with him
All right,
on the side.
okay.
And I was also told that ultimately it is the pilot's responsibility to know where all their obstacles are. These towers do end up on all of their flight planning apps and that type of thing. I was shown an example, Concord Airport, there's a cell tower there, 295 feet, and I was given a screenshot to show its demarcation on the map relative and so forth. So I understand all that. I just wanted to ask, with the light at 200 feet, and this might be for staff, do we have any idea if that actually affects people? I mean, do we know the details of that light or what's projected?
Can't speak to that. A light study would probably have to be done for something like that to be spoken to.
All right. That's fine. I know that's pretty random. And trust me, I just came up with this today, so don't worry. All right. Any other
I have a quick,
questions? Sure.
this is, so we're committing to no light. What happens if, for some reason, it's required? Is it just, it goes up, or is this, what happens if for some kind of safety study or whatever?
Yeah, if the FAA were to change regulations or something's required, then it's.
We just adapt, do it, and
Correct.
move on. Okay.
You said you had an easement with the landfill. Is that, you got a deeded easement? That's what you're going to use to service it? Correct. Landfill, don't they shut gates at certain hours? That's not a problem.
Drawing of the easement that's kind of snaking around the backside of the landfill property.
Lee, if I may?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I went out, based on some questioning by Commissioner Hunt at the public hearing. She asked questions about the road. I asked some further questions and asked for a site visit. I went to the site with Mr. Brown, excuse me, Mr. Brown, but with Mr. Brown, and looked at the roads. My understanding is, if you go back to the I want to see another one first. Go back a little bit to the one picture that showed the zigzag access road off of there. That road right there that zigzags down into the area. My understanding is, from my conversation with Mr. Brown, is that that road will not be used.
So that is just purely for the lot to be created. That will not be a road.
Yeah, it's right now, it doesn't have a gate on it. It's got a dead tree across it.
That, as of right now, will just be all the existing vegetation.
My understanding when the neighbors wanted to keep it that way. So go back to the other picture that you just pulled up back there. I don't have the pointer, but if you look at the main building in the middle, that's the recycle center, if I remember correctly. And just to the right of that picture, that's the access into the Greenway Recycling. And that road looks like you see it dotted down, that's the main access in and out for construction and otherwise. So that's the traffic will go in and out down Holbrook, but that's where it will go in and out. And I'm making a statement here, and I confirm that is correct.
That is correct.
Okay.
That easement is in perpetuity? Is there, 20 years from now, if that easement goes away, would the access then potentially come through the flag lot?
They would have to come in and possibly revise the rezoning to come back through
So
that.
their plan specifically states that cannot be used for access?
It does not allow them to access through
Okay,
the flag portion of
does not allow them. Very good.
I got a couple more general ones, I guess. So I guess this is more kind of the build out. So we're, 60,000 people, 60 square miles. So we're, 1,000 residents, a square mile, kind of what the clip is on these things. So I know, and this is probably all driven off, I'll get on my mic here, driven off more Vermilion buildup, it's 1,000 homes there, so it's probably a capacity thing if I had to guess. I know there's some topography there that's difficult for you. And I'm guessing the next closest one is probably the one off of 21. Next tower is probably the one off 21, so that's probably about a mile away. So just as we finish our build-out of Huntersville, what should we expect for more cell tower population? Should we then kind of plan for one every mile or something like, Tim, this is probably more you than anybody else, but what does it look like in an urban area as far as, capacity and what's needed?
And I'm Tim Sutton with AT&T. Mile and a half for typical 4G coverage. When we get to the higher speed 5G, it doesn't go as far. I don't have, distances on that, but typically mile and a half between towers is customary.
And the capacity for those mile and a half?
I don't have those numbers.
I mean, vaguely 5,000 folks or?
I can't speak.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to get an idea of how much
right.
more of these we need to plan to look at, I guess, as we finish our
Capacity
job here.
shouldn't be an issue because our build plan, when we build a new tower, is to throw at it every ounce of spectrum that we have in our view on the first visit. It's not an incremental build out. We're going to come in there with all of our 4G bandwidth that we have in the area, and we're not doing the microcell, but the intermediate 5G. So it's kind of all at once. So
Okay.
it'll solve, as you can see in the schematic there. That's the Verizon one. The next one was
Okay.
and so it flips here. The blue and the white is no coverage, and the red is red, and the green is proper coverage.
Okay.
And I think that on this one, it has the directly to the west. Oh no, up and down. What's that? 21 or 21, and then 115. So those are microcells there. I believe in the red at the bottom right, in the red in the top right. So that's kind of our distances between towers. You can see where the tower is to the top left, and then to the top right, and then the bottom right. So those are the tower locations. And then so we're basically filling in this dead spot here in the middle.
Okay. And that's the switch down there off 77 then, right? That's,
So it's the one to the due west.
yeah.
That's another
No. The one,
That's the hub for the
hub, yeah.
That's the hub for the micro cells that are up and down 115 there,
okay,
where all the lines connect.
gotcha.
There's a small business park, there's another tower adjacent to 77, but there's a lot of fill-in products too. There's not a one-size-fit-all.
Yeah, I got that. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And, sir, I also forgot if you can just provide an address for the record as well.
Tim Sutton, 9014 Carneros Creek Road, Charlotte, North Carolina.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, I have a question for you. If you can come up, name and address for the public record.
Certainly. Pardon me. John Brown, 11743 Trails End Lane.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Brown, the easement is through Greenway Recycling.
Correct.
Which then also borders Greenway North Mac and then just Greenway whatever. My question ties to this. Greenway North Mac, so the larger parcel, the landfill, has a sunset, and it has been extended and whatever. Is there any effect on this project, this access, this easement, and so forth, should the landfill finally sunset and be capped?
The recycling facility has a permit that operates into perpetuity.
Okay.
If the landfill were to close, we would use the access that was drawn not, it's drawn from Holbrooks Road, except we would utilize the west side of the recycling facility to access that road. We would still use the scale house and the access road that exists today.
Gotcha. So ultimately, no matter what happens to the landfill, you'll be keeping the access on Greenway recycling property, that parcel.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
All right, other questions for staff or the applicant? No? Okay. I'll accept the motion if we got one.
Sure, I'll make it.
In considering the proposed rezoning petition R23-10 Commercial Communications Tower, the planning board recommends approval based on the plan being consistent with the Huntersville 2040 Community Plan Policies, PS1, LU1, and with the Holbrooks Road Corridor Plan. It is reasonable in the public interest to approve the rezoning plan because it is consistent with the envisioned use and development patterns set forth in the 2040 Community Plan, Holbrook Road Corridor Plan, and in keeping with the spirit of the ordinance.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion? Greg, you made the motion, any thoughts?
No, I mean, it just seems necessary and seems like they're following the appropriate guidelines. No, I don't have any more to add than that.
That's okay. Chris?
Yeah, I feel like it's a utility kind of public need. It seems like they've followed all the, checks and balances. I mean, I understand the need for the light, but also could see living near there and having a flashing light, 100 feet above my house. So I don't know how I'd feel about that either. So pro and a con there.
Jody?
The reason I like it is just for the emergency services. I know where my business is our fire panel is always going down due to communication problems. So having more cell service would be excellent for that area.
Okay. If no other discussion, then let's go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Agenda item 4D. We're going to consider a recommendation on petition R23-11, Morningstar Storage. It's a request by Morningstar Properties to rezone approximately 3.9 acres located at both 16230 and 16204 Old Statesville Road from special purpose and highway commercial to special purpose conditional district for an indoor storage facility. Mr. James.
Thank you. Good evening and Happy New Year.
Thanks, sir.
Please enter my staff report into record.
Transportation already exists, being on 115 and McCord Road. And the T5.1 design street improvements and considerations for the surrounding context and various users. Staff felt that the plan did meet those items. However, we felt that the proposal was not consistent with the future land use map for an employment center in that area. See that in the blue shade. A storage facility is typically a low employment use. Also, LU 6.3 calls for small-scale neighborhood serving commercial and office uses allowed in that area, which is the town core basic area. With that being said, staff finds it appropriate for the rezone to be approved based on the current property composition. Roughly 3 of the 4 acres is already zoned for indoor storage facility. The addition of the approximate additional 1 acre is to accommodate for the buffer requirement. One thing we've gone over with the applicants, for us to be comfortable with a 66-foot buffer as opposed to 80, is that the intent of that buffer is met, and that could mean a number of things, additional plantings, which the applicant is willing to do. They've shown a 1,000-foot buffer section. We're still working on some items, maybe incorporation of some smaller, more native plants that still meets the total number of plantings. And then any other, another condition would be any other minor staff review comments or address. That's a pretty typical condition we have for approval. So with that being said, I'm here for any questions. The applicants are here as well, if you have any additional questions for them.
All right, thank you. Any questions for staff? Chris, go ahead.
I have a couple just to get started. So you said 1,000 square foot buffer area, but it's bigger than that, right? That 66 by however wide, it's like 20,000 square feet, right?
Correct. They've shown a example 1,000 square foot section.
Right.
For our ordinance, we have a number of required plantings within 1,000 square foot section, and then you just multiply that by however many square feet you have.
It's like 4 trees per 1,000 square feet or something like that.
Yeah.
And there are 75% of those need to be large maturing. I wanted to get a definition of large maturing. Is that like over 36 feet? Like, because I saw that the max height is 36 feet.
Well, there's not an actual size, but there's a variety of trees that don't get over generally 25 feet for a small tree. Those are dogwoods, red buds, crepe myrtles, trees that don't offer a canopy. But that buffer requirement would require large, small, and then shrubs. The intent is to have a full opaque buffer.
Yeah. So in that 66-foot width, some percentage, 75% it looks like, would be large maturing, which would get to the height of that building. So if you were standing to the south of that building, you would see eventually, right, you would see trees and not a 30-foot tall building.
Correct. And so we would require the large maturing trees, and as you've said, typically those can get up to 35, 40 feet in height. The building they've asked for is 35 feet, so that would cover the full opaque buffer if it was full maturity. They also have some large trees there in that area that would remain. There's a 48-inch in diameter tree.
Yeah, to the west, yeah, to the north and...
Well, to the south, and they've got a couple...
Yeah, there's one
going
to
in
the
on
south too,
front.
yeah.
Also one against McCord. It's a pretty tight quarter. We're going to try to work with them as well as possible to get a creative way to grade that so it can be saved.
Yep. And then when I was driving that corridor, I noticed there's another large building. I was just looking it up. Looks like it's Bellamore is the name of it.
Okay.
How tall is that? Do you guys know how tall that one is? And I guess that's in a highway, or I mean in a certain zone, so that's why it was allowed to be so high
36
along that same corridor?
Yeah, so 36 feet is what that building is. 36 feet is allowed. This building can go up to 36 feet as well.
And its setback seems further off the road, and I guess, why did the town, I measured it, just Google Maps, it seems like it was 70 feet back, and this one's closer to like 50-ish feet back from what I saw. So why that decision was made?
Bellamore's placed at future right-of-way,
Okay.
and the future's now for this part of the right-of-way, so you might have started from the center over, that's got the turn lane in, so we've already used that lane, that area. We will be using the Bellamore area later.
Gotcha. So it will be essentially right up against the road?
Very similar to this.
Okay, eventually, okay. That's all I have for now. I'm sure I'll come up with a couple more.
I have a couple questions on the buffer. As far as the reduced buffer, is that stormwater pond in the buffer? It looked like it.
The stormwater pond to the rear,
Yeah.
that buffer actually isn't required, and it's actually along a railroad right-of-way. So they would just stay out of that right-of-way to the rear.
I thought it was on the, that bottom corner. Maybe I missed.
No, the bottom corner is, in that red area,
Yeah.
is mostly used for driveway and buffer area.
The buffer.
That's what I'm,
Yeah, it's right behind that garage on that lower southeast corner there.
isn't that the buffer?
That is what they're calling the buffer.
Stormwater pond is in the north.
There's two of them. There's one on the northeast and one on the southeast.
It was on the grading point, yeah.
Sheet
Was
C4.
was that a temporary sediment basin, or was that a, either way?
I don't
Called,
see that on the rezoning site plan.
It's on-
There may be a temporary, the applicant may be able to answer that.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, our primary DEP stormwater is on the north side of the site.
so what's in the southeast corner where it says detention?
Secondary.
Yeah.
You're right, there is a conflict.
Yeah.
there. The intent, in my understanding, is that we can still plant within that stormwater pond.
You're gonna plant.
As long as we specify correct specimens that will survive in this condition.
Yeah, but it won't be a 40-foot tree.
Cypress or something.
Well, see, what I was getting at is, I mean, it seemed like you would need to subtract that from the planting requirements, or,
Not big stuff.
It was my understanding that that was temporary. If that's permanent, then you would not be able to do the required buffering in that back corner.
My understanding from our civils that we're allowed to plant in that
No.
pond.
Nope, you can't put large trees inside of the detention pond.
We can look at an underground solution for that.
Yeah, so an underground solution in the parking
In the
area.
parking lot that funnels back through there and retains the landscape.
Right, I mean, you can have a storm outlet through there, it just can't be the detention area.
a couple other things on the buffer.
Jake, can I get you to hold on a sec?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
If I could have the applicant enter name and address for the public record, please.
Yeah, Marshall Macon with Morningstar Properties, 4019 Abingdon Road, Charlotte.
It seems like to me that that's a lot of plants. Like if you have an 80, and I'm not trying to say an 80-foot buffer, those plants they're tight. I mean, if you take that same number and you know, whatever happens with this pond here, but also there's some tree saving there that said we got to take out some of that space. That's a lot of plants in there. And I'm just wondering about the effectiveness. I mean, year 1 through 5, it'll look great, but stuff starts crowding in and shading it out. I was wondering if, like, perhaps a fence as a supplement rather than all those plants. Because, I mean, you do that to scale and you plant those things at the size they need to be, it's not going to fit if we reduce like that, in my opinion. And I'm just thinking maybe there's some alternatives in there for, picking up that screening with a nice fence or something like that.
Sure.
It's just a thought.
And so to that, staff's going back and forth with the applicant about planting materials that would give that additional planting in the 66-foot.
Yeah.
We believe there are types of shrubs and trees that also meet the ordinance that are smaller spread, but they gain more variety, so you're not just doing a monoculture of plants. So I think it's possible to do it at that reduced scale. It's certainly something that you could do is have a motion to do the regular buffer in a 66 and then add an additional fence.
I was just thinking out loud, honestly, on that one. Anyway, that's all I have for the buffer. I may have a couple other things here in a minute.
I follow up on that question about buffer. I heard you say, Nate, that there is no requirement for a buffer on the east side along the railroad. What's the requirement for a buffer on the north side along McCord Road?
So the buffer, generally speaking, for a special purpose for indoor storage is 80 feet. However, the ordinance allows a reduction of that fully if the building meets architectural standards of Article 4. So with the building addressing the street frontage and having not just a flat front, modulating walls and varying roof heights, as well as a door on the front corner that meets the pedestrian frontage, staff's opinion is that meets the requirements for a full reduction.
And that would be the same along Highway 115 on the west side?
Correct.
All right, then I guess my next question, there's only one modification in this report, and that's for the south side, which was just discussed. Why would not the north side and west side also be modification request, even though the staff has said that we think that it can be, well, I'm the right word, accepted based on the architectural rules? Shouldn't that also be a request for a modification?
It's not our opinion that needs a request since the ordinance allows it specifically.
Okay.
And that's an actual footnote in that buffer section.
Some more buffer questions.
Sure.
So the request is rezoning from highway commercial to special purpose. The storage facility cannot be in highway commercial, is that?
Correct.
Okay. And then how do those two zonings in general differ in buffer requirements?
If that was to go full highway commercial, it would be a 30-foot buffer against an adjacent property. However, I think the property to the south is also highway commercial. So it's really the use within that requires the SP and then the 80-foot buffer, because it's a different zoning district.
Okay, and then the 1 acre that's being rezoned or proposed to be rezoned, is that, it probably doesn't matter, but is that the south acre?
Mm-hmm. Yep. It would all be recombined into one property for
So
SP.
in theory, it could be a 30-foot buffer if it stayed highway commercial.
No, because the property to the south is also highway commercial. Generally speaking, you're correct, highway commercial next to like say adjacent single-family home in highway commercial then would have a 30-foot buffer.
But if this was 2 highway commercials beside each other?
Mm-hmm. No buffer.
No buffer.
Right.
Okay.
So if this
same difference.
never happened, there would be a 30-foot buffer against there,
Okay.
depending on the intensity of the use as well.
And just a comment to be clear, both of these parcels are owned by the Dove family. So there's a reason why one goes with the other, regardless of who may come in here in the future. If this were not approved, somebody else comes, maybe both parcels were going again, and we'd have the same problem.
Yep, exactly.
Do you have a presentation? You want to go through your presentation before we ask questions to you, or?
We do not have a follow-up presentation, but available for questions.
All right. So on the southwest corner, you have that glazing look. I mean, is that something standard you guys like going with? I mean, I just feel like it feels a little too modern commercial for where it's located. I mean, is that something you could go more of that brick stucco and less glazing there, or is that?
I mean, this is kind of our brand standard.
Right, yeah.
for our office.
I figured, yeah.
And part of it is also to address the architectural standards of building articulation and using different building materials, right? So it's trying to offset some of the massing. So, I mean, we're happy to revisit that. I mean, that's kind of our standard, but stucco or brick were preferred of that office.
I mean, I'm not the architect on this panel. I just noticed that. I mean, that's just going to stand out when you're driving up 115. You just see this, 3-foot glazing structure, and you're going to like, this doesn't really fit right here. But I don't know. I don't know where we're headed. I didn't see that in the 2040 plan, but. So,
if I can piggyback off of that, I'm going to run through this list real quick, and then if you could, I'll ask a question to it, and you tell me which ones. So I plugged in Charlotte, North Carolina on your location section. Got 19 to pop up. We got Baxter Village, Carmel, Carowinds, Celanese, which is in Rock Hill, Cornelius, East Gastonia, Indian Land, Lake Wiley, Little Rock Road, Matthews, Mooresville, New Hope, Ray, Sherrills Ford, South Boulevard, South End, Tybola, Uptown, and W.T. Harris. With those, there's a number of them that look old, and were those just like acquired, or did the company used to build under a different look, or what's the case with some of those?
I mean, a large percentage of our portfolio, 70% is acquisitions, so we haven't been able to
Gotcha.
control and dictate.
So out of the ones that show up in our area, what, because I still see some differences, what are the ones that are built to how you described as sort of your standard?
I'd say Ray Road is the closest comp to this. Down in South Valentine. Similar construction methods. We got brick on the ground floor.
Okay.
I mean, it's going to be logical. You're not going to build this unless you think you're going to make money. So you've identified the need. And I did just a quick Google on the number of storage facilities in the town of Huntersville, and I came up with 15. Now, to be fair, some of those are purely outdoor storage. Some of them are combination. Some are small little places. And every time I ask, do we need another one? Somebody told me, said, have you tried to find a storage space? So I haven't tried, but I'm told it's difficult. So there appears to be a need, and you must know the need. Your projection, or you wouldn't be looking to build one here.
Yeah, correct. I mean, we've done a demand study, and we look at it more from a square foot of available versus the total number of stores. As you pointed out, of those 15 facilities, my guess is 12 of them are significantly smaller and might not meet the demand of the local neighborhood. So I think, and then as we project and look into the growth in the immediate area, we're certainly comfortable with the demand for this. So we look at it on a saturation of square footage, not number of facilities.
And I want to ask one question, going back to something that Mr. Farber mentioned at the beginning, that was about solar panels. What, and I'm going to ask him the question, what was the statement about solar panels?
Yeah, so during the town board meeting, there were questions asked if the applicants would be willing to incorporate solar energy into the buildings. The applicant, since that public hearing meeting, said they would be open to that if requested by the town board.
Okay.
I have a question, Jesse. If y'all can help me. And it may be the zone or the zoning. In the past, we've had the building massing study. You know, for example, if you're adjacent to, you know, like a hotel, to a home, or an apartment next to a building, a business, or apartments next to resident, there's that section in the ordinance that talks about the massing, how much massing. How did we apply that to this, like to get 3 stories?
Sure. So that part of the ordinance is an art. It's not a science. It doesn't give a calculation for the distance. But specifically, if a building like this was next to a single-family home on either side, in the past with hotels and things, we've stepped back, in apartment buildings, we've stepped back, say the 3rd floor, when it's adjacent to that smaller, less intense use. In this particular case, we have a railroad right-of-way to the rear and a service-type commercial use to the south. We felt that 36 feet or 35 feet, which is within the height requirement, didn't necessarily need the scaling back of certain floors in order to gain that height. So to reiterate, it's an art. It's not a science on how you meet that Article 4.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for staff or the applicant? Good, one more.
A couple of questions. How many employees will be involved here for the applicant?
Generally about 3 employees.
3, is that 24/7 or?
Yes, in most cases, it's
Okay. And I'm going to go back, I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
facility is open through keypad access 24/7. Typically, it's not staffed 24/7.
Are there, but there'll be employees there in the daytime?
Yes, sir.
Okay. During regular business hours. And going back again, I forgot to ask about buffers. What is and I didn't see it on the site plan, and that's me not looking good, but the depth of the buffer on the north side and the west side, what are those depths?
Well, there wouldn't be buffers. They would be build-to lines since they meet Article 4. Typically, you go 15, but since there's the addition of a second row of street trees, we asked the applicant to move that back to about 22 feet, I believe. That gives those trees the ability to mature. So it's about 22 feet.
The distance from the building to the curb on
The
McCoy
distance
Road,
from
McCoy Road,
the-
Highway 115,
Yes.
22 feet? Okay.
It's like about 40 feet to the north and 57 feet if you're going to the west over 115. No, but to the curb, to the building.
Well, they've got
Easy's answering though, not,
22s to the
not
right.
counting though, right? Like today, right, yes, but they're putting them after the right-of-way.
Well, my question is what's the distance from the side of the building to the street?
So you've got a 15-foot landscape easement on both sides, plus an additional, say, 3 feet until you get to the side path. So that's 18 feet plus 10 for the shared use path, which is 10 feet. So that's roughly 28 feet till you get to the future right-of-way line.
All right, so about 28 feet on the north and west side?
Correct.
Okay.
That was to the right-of-way, not to, you asked for the curb.
Right, the future right-of-way, I understand.
Yeah, so there's going to be some space between the right-of-way and the curb. I don't know what that is off the top of my head, but
There would be more, if it were to be approved and built, there would be more until the right-of-way was widened, and then they would lose some of that. Understand? Okay.
yeah, at first it'll appear that it's set back a little further than the future right-of-way widening would make it a tiny bit closer. But to reiterate, we did ask them to move it back more than the required build-to line for the addition of the second row of street trees. So it is a little further than a typical 15-foot build-to line.
Jesse, hypothetically, you like questions that start with hypothetically, right?
Those are scary.
3 acres is special purpose today, correct?
Roughly.
Yeah, roughly.
Yep.
And this would be permitted by right, no rezoning, correct?
Correct.
So again, hypothetically, I'm not saying this is what they need to do, but hypothetically, if they scale back that instead of 102,000, if they made it 50,000, it could literally look the same on that corner, just smaller. Is that correct?
Hypothetically. But to answer your question, yes, they could have a scaled down a building without a rezone. They would still have to meet that 80-foot buffer. So that reduces the amount of area they can use for storage.
So there was a question, I believe, during the public hearing about, and this might not even be doable, about a crosswalk, since they're improving the 10-foot sidewalk paths going north and east and west there. Is there a way you can improve any pedestrian traffic across 115 at that intersection in conjunction with this project to get people across?
There would have to be a DOT study, I believe, to do something like that. It's not, it wouldn't be a requirement to add a crosswalk. It would certainly make it more pedestrian friendly, but typically it's not something that I believe we could require, Brian, an applicant to do a crosswalk across a DOT.
Yeah, not required, but it's just, something the applicant, if they wanted to, add it in or something like that. I don't know what the cost of that would be, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if they looked into a study for that or not, but.
Also, there's a public project approved for this at the corner of McCord, from McCord up to Highway 73. Crosswalks will be installed at that point in time. Is it, by the time you go through the process of doing something like this, the studies and everything involved, it's going to pretty much catch up to that project. So there wouldn't be much time gained by having an interim crosswalk until you get to the permanent cross-section.
All right, any other questions? No? All right, I'll take a motion.
One thing I would like to add, though, is it was brought up earlier about the permanent retention pond. I believe the applicant has voiced that they could do underground retention under the parking lot to meet that buffer section. So we would ask that if you do a motion, that you would add that as well.
In considering the proposed rezoning petition R2311, Morningstar Storage staff finds the proposal as generally compliant with the Town of Huntersville site design and architectural standards within the zoning ordinance and tied into the land use policies LU 51 and T51, but not consistent with the envisioned uses set forth in the 2040 Huntersville Community Plan, sections LU1 and 6.3. The current zoning designation of the parcel 0110128 is special purpose, which comprises roughly 3 of the 4 acres in the proposal and does not permit by right the proposed use, thus rezoning the approximate 4-acre site to special use conditions for approval. Modification request for a reduced property line buffer from 80 feet to 66 feet. Staff can recommend this request if the applicant can prove that by reducing the buffer, The matching plantings can be sustained in the 66-foot wide buffer area. Staff recommends providing a 1,000 square foot buffer section on the proposed purpose conditional district for a reason of gaining the needed land to allow the site to come into conformity with the zoning ordinance buffer requirements is appropriate with the following conditions. Landscape that shows the mature growth of the plantings can be achieved with the reduced buffer proposal and underground storage under the parking lot in lieu of the existing drainage shown on plans. And 2, minor staff site review comments are addressed. It is reasonable and in the public interest to approve the rezoning plan because the rezoning is consistent with the land use in the general vicinity and meets the site and architectural standards for Huntersville.
Yes.
I believe at the start of the motion, you mentioned that staff finds the proposal. No, I did. If you could just say the planning board recommends approval.
Planning board
Recommends. So the planning board recommends approval of the ...
Do we need to clarify which BMP we're talking about in lieu of? Yep.
No, not the whole thing.
Tracy's.
Look at, no.
You could just say the southern BMP.
Couldn't tell, Chris, couldn't tell. It's
I
all
think
right.
you put it in the right condition because it was within the buffer. So just say the BMP within the buffer, the southern buffer.
BMP within the buffer in the southeast corner.
Second.
Thank you. All right, any discussion on the motion? Trina?
I'm not going to vote for this. I'm sorry.
I'm kidding.
We are offering 14 feet on this massive building. This is like 4 acres. And we're giving up 14 feet of buffer. It seems like you've got a building that is 4 acres big. What is 14 feet? So for that, I'm not going to vote for it.
Other discussion?
My personal preference would be to see the Dove Properties existing buildings repurposed and not to have something of this scale at the corner of McCord and 115. That would be my personal preference. However, I believe in personal property rights. The Doves own 4 acres there. 3 acres of it today would allow basically this same development. I know it wouldn't be as large, but with that, I get to the point where I'll be comfortable and will support it.
So I was actually on the fence on this one as well. I was a no because of the height of the building, where it was located after listening to the public hearing, and then don't like the glass on the southeast corner there, or southwest corner. But when Scott mentioned that, the north 3 acres could be used, a smaller building, but it could still be 35, 36 feet tall, I'm like, I don't know what we're doing arguing over, adding, acre to the south. They're going to put some tall trees there, so you won't be able to see it from the south anyway. I don't know. I was back and forth this whole time. But I just feel like they'll do what's right. I hope they'll do what's right. I hope the town works with them on everything. But yeah, I was definitely on the fence. I was leaning no at the beginning of this.
This reminds me of the very first rezoning that came when Jody and I joined. And I was the lone no on that one. And when it went to the commissioners, now the commissioners have changed, obviously, but when it went to the commissioners, it was a no for them. And I feel like it stands true for me that, you know, this is, when we start eroding the rules, like, that's now the rule. So 66 feet is now the you know, rule for everybody else. And it has nothing to do specifically with this particular issue, but the rule is 80 feet. You're building a building that's 4 acres big. Like, what is 14 feet? So I just feel like I can stay true to myself.
Maybe I should have asked earlier, but what is staff looking for to applicant being compliant with this 1,000 square foot buffer section? What exactly are you?
What we've asked is to have some creative plants in there that would still meet the 80-foot buffer rule and not have to necessarily cramp the plants in there. But there's a number of varieties where you can have a smaller spread, same number of plants within a 66-foot as opposed to an 80. So we're looking for a cross-section with a variety of plants that would, at full maturity, that would meet that intent.
So a change of kind of like species that you're comfortable that.
Exactly. Yeah, they showed a cross-section after the public hearing that I wasn't necessarily comfortable with. But after looking at the approved planting lists, there are a number of varieties, and there are some actually that are more native that don't bunch as much. Say, you know, rhododendrons instead of arborvitaes, things like that could get your numbers there for an 80-foot buffer, but still not crowd it.
So I'm interpreting that as if it's sufficient to what you think is capable, then the buffer will be met in some sense as an 80-foot buffer, as far as visually buffer.
Just not the width.
Right. So it's going to be, in theory, the same number of plantings, but different species potentially.
Right.
So that gives me a little bit more comfort than just eliminating the 14 feet and also eliminating the planting. But in this case, that doesn't appear to be the case.
Right. So, you know, there was a study likely done that 80 foot is your typical for any plant within that variety that's allowed, but there are creative ways to add more with certain plants instead of just any old big buffer plant.
All right, thank you.
The southern border, buffer doesn't bother me really. A reduction to 66 feet from 80 is consistent and reasonable with our voting and the town board's voting. Buffers are constantly reduced as long as this buffer meets the intent of the zoning ordinance. I believe the one on the south does. The question is, you have to decide here on this board, does the recommendation by the planning department, is that reasonable for not having a buffer on the McCord Road or Statesville Road side? No 80, where an 80-foot buffer is required, there is no buffer. It's open area. So we've got to decide, one, and our job is, I see our job as, does this project meet the requirement of the zoning ordinance? And then taking planning department's recommendations and study, because the ones that looked at this, into consideration, so we can make a recommendation to the town board. I'm not sure which way I'm voting right now. So, but I will say the request for a modification on the southern buffer doesn't bother me. It's the other two that I've got to consider.
I thought the the other two were by right.
The other two, there was a question I asked earlier, and you can repeat it if you wish, Nathan. I asked, is a required 80-foot buffer along McCord Road. There's a required 80-foot buffer along Highway 115. However, the staff has deemed that the building is of such architectural design that those requirements can be waived. Is that correct?
Correct. The full 80-foot buffer on McCord and 115 by ordinance can be reduced fully if it meets Article 4.
And I will go on to say that the property on the south side goes hand in hand with the property on the north side. This property is right on the edge of the employment area. So I can see that. I don't have a problem with that being included in the project and used as the buffer. It is one of the commissioners asked if some commercial will be put on the first floor of this. The applicant, if I remember correctly, stated that that had not been a model that had been successful, or they had seen it being successful, and they really wouldn't. They can speak to that if they wish. But this is a commercial project. It is a use of this property. It is tax money coming to town. Otherwise, it sits there until someone else comes along. The last thing I want to see on this piece of property, to tell you the truth, is another gas station. But that's not my choice.
Yeah, I would just say, and for the commissioners, when they're going over the minutes and watching the meeting, this is one of those I'm sensing, I mean, I'll speak for myself, but it's kind of consistent with a couple of the others, where this project doesn't really excite me, but that's not a requirement. We have more of a specific purview than the town board does. They have more latitude with this. I'd love to see the corner more activated than what this would bring. At the same time, this is also not lost on me that when we have constrained roads, constrained schools, this doesn't affect either of them. This helps maintain what I feel is already our strong blended tax base of residential versus commercial. So for the purposes of our board, it's fine, and I'll be voting for it. But personally, it just sort of is. So I'll leave it at that. Any other discussion? Jay?
Yeah, to echo some of these, I mean, I think what you said, Jeff, it doesn't excite you. It doesn't excite me. Could there be a more active, better use there? It's not my, crossing the line. I think what Scott said was very appropriate. This is owned SP. It's 1 acre. So by right, there's a lot that could be there. And I respect that. The buffer doesn't concern me as much as the massing out on the street. But again, it's kind of a by right thing too. So I spent a lot of time on this, thinking through, different pieces of it, and I'm going to support it. I think, like everybody said, it doesn't excite me, but that's not the criteria that I need to use to make this decision.
Yeah, I could probably echo in a lot of the sentiments around, first with Chris. Yeah, like I said, the buffers don't, I mean, we're giving up, 14 feet on the south side with no building on it, basically, and that's just 15%. And that's no big deal. The east side's a railway, and then the street side, like we are following the ordinance, because the ordinance says that you can reduce it as long as we get to put a little bit of architecture on the building. So there's a trade-off there. The other point for me is, by right, without that other parcel on the end, it could be anything. It could still be 36 feet tall. We wouldn't have to have a chance to review it. It could be anything in highway commercial. And as far as getting excited about what it is, I mean, let me see if I can help with that. So I question that it's not an employment center because you really don't know what goes on. These are climate control facilities. There's people in there that are running their Etsy shops out of it, and Pinterest. There's people in there that are doing publications and things like that. So it does drive employment. You might not see it, and it might not show up on their taxes, but they're doing work there. The other point I guess I wanted to make is this enhances the surrounding neighborhoods, because as we continue to approve developments that have smaller footprints, there's less storage in the houses. Houses have smaller footprints. Our residents need places to store their goods. So this is actually helpful, especially when you're talking about building more affordable housing. You're not talking about putting extra space in all these houses in order to, and drive the price up. There's an alternative to storing stuff. So there's a couple positives here that you just don't see from the curb, I think. So I will support this.
Primarily, just to make sure I correctly say your name, Jesse, was it ever considered that giving up some of the southern buffer to increase the buffer on the north and west sides for planting?
So the reason initially they were going to give an 80-foot buffer, but they had to slide the building back some on both sides to give up some room for a double row of street trees. So through working with them, we felt comfortable if we could see that cross-section to have that reduction, with the caveat that we got and gained on the front end wider space for maturing trees so they don't just get trimmed on the back. So that it's gaining a little bit of buffer, if you will, on the front by the double row of street trees. Okay. So that will block the front of McCord and 115. And it also allows, staff has the ability to be flexible with those build-to lines. We thought it was a good idea to move that back so you can have that full mature tree.
All right. Thank you, Jesse.
You're welcome.
All right, if no other discussion, let's take a vote, if we will. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's okay. It's all right, Trina. It's okay. That's all right. That motion carries 8-1. Thank you to all the applicants this evening. We're going to jump to other business. We do have one thing actually on here. We need to approve the 2024 Planning Board regular meeting schedule. The November and December meetings, if we follow our normal pattern of the fourth Tuesday of the month, the November one falls on the Tuesday just before Thanksgiving, and the December meeting falls on Christmas Eve. I'd like to make a motion to adopt the 2024 meeting schedule with November and December's meetings falling on the third Tuesday of the month versus the standard fourth.
Looks good to me. Second.
All right. Any discussion on that? None? Okay. All those in favor? Any opposed? Excellent. All right. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Second?
Substitute motion.
Stop it. All those in favor of adjourning? Any opposed? None. Motion adjourned.